Okay, thank you very much, Richard. One of the things that I like about this conference a lot, and there are several, is that I used to worry who was going to take up all this scholarship and be interested in these issues after my generation passed. So it's really heartening to see a lot of younger faces in the audience and even much younger faces in the audience and on the panel. I think that's really very refreshing. Okay. Turkey is a relatively new country. It was founded on October 29th, 1923, and as the Republic of Turkey. And with new countries, Turkey's not unique in this, come new political cultures, institutions, and histories. And this is not only true of Turkey. In some ways, I think Turkey is an exemplar of this phenomenon because the founders of Turkey had a lot of baggage that they wanted to jettison, and not least of which the Armenian Genocide, which was widely known throughout the world at the time. It was very, very heavily publicized. The Turkish origin myth goes something like this. Turkey was defeated in World War I. Istanbul was occupied by foreign military forces, along with many parts of Asia Minor. And the intent of the Allies was to create states, including Armenia, that would be agents of Western imperialism and influence in the region. And this was prevented from happening because Ataturk was able to mobilize a powerful nationalist movement that fought a courageous and difficult war against these foreign invaders, expelled them, expelled the Greek invaders, and created this new Republic of Turkey. This was to be a unified state, a modernizing state, a Western-oriented state, and a state that would not be under Western control or influence. Turkey would create its own fate on its own. This idea of a radical discontinuity and a break with the Ottoman past and the creation of a new day, a new era, a new country, is a part of the history as it is presented to the Turkish people and the outside world. And generally, this characterization is accepted by many journalists and academics who write about the history of Turkey, this idea of the creation of a new state, radically different, a radical disjuncture with the past, the Ottoman past. There is a big blind spot here, of course, which is the fate of Ottoman minorities. Where are the Assyrians, the Greeks, and the Armenians who constituted such a large percentage of the population in the Ottoman Empire? It's erased. It doesn't appear. It's not part of the history. The Armenians are either invisible or they're portrayed as a treasonous fifth columnist element that had to be and was successfully neutered. So whether we talk about the actual commission of the Armenian Genocide from 1915 to 1922, or the omission of the Armenian Genocide from 1923 to the present, there's a continuity there in this whole history of denial and erasure. And this goes back to the CUP. Their policy, they're the ones that committed the genocide, not the Kemalists, although later Kemalists participated in it, and many people who were important in the genocide, important figures in the genocide, transferred over to the new Republic of Turkey, often occupying high-ranking positions. So I would argue that this image of a radical disjuncture and total change doesn't apply to the genocide itself and the characterization of minorities as unacceptable in either the very late Ottoman Empire or in the Republic of Turkey itself. There's a continuity from 1913, 1914 up until the present. The way in which the denial is presented, the sophistication, the amount of money that is poured into it, I think all of these things have accelerated and they have changed. But the basic message, I think, stays the same. So by 1914, I think that all the basic elements of the Armenian genocide were in place. The CUP seized power in a 1908 coup. In 1913, there was an intra-party coup in which the most nationalist elements of the CUP took power. And then the gendarmerie, the special organization, and other elements that actually perpetrated the genocide were in place. So the only thing that was missing with the beginning of the war was the war itself that would provide a cover for the genocide. And that Turkey entered the war in November of 1914. There had been killings of Armenians beginning in August of 1914. They accelerated after Turkey entered the war. And then again in early 1915, and by the end of April of that year, you had full-fledged genocide. So by the end of 1916, the Armenian community of over 2 million people was either dead or in tatters, and essentially Armenians were eliminated from the Ottoman Empire as a major cultural presence. Now, a lot of people who look at the issue of denial think that it's a fairly recent phenomenon beginning, let's say, in the 1970s or so. But actually, the denial of the Armenian genocide coincides with the genocide itself. It begins almost immediately. And this begins with a letter that was sent to the Sublime Porte by the Russians, the French, and the British, and I'll read you a paragraph from that letter. The Allies said, quote, "For approximately 1 month, the Kurdish and Turkish population of Armenia has acted in collusion, often with the support of the Ottoman authorities, to massacre the Armenians. Such massacres have taken place towards mid-April in Erzurum, Derchun, Ejin, Bitlis, Mush, Sasun, Zeytun, and throughout Cilicia. The inhabitants of some 100 villages in the district of Van have all been murdered, and the Armenian quarter is under siege by the Turks. At the same time, the Ottoman government in Constantinople has dealt severely with a harmless Armenian population. In the face of these new crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilization, the Allied governments are letting the Sublime Porte know publicly that they will hold personally responsible for those crimes all members of the Ottoman government, as well as those of its agents who will be found implicated in similar massacres." The response from the Ottoman government didn't take long, and what they do is they dismiss all of these charges as lies. They accuse the Armenians of being in collusion with the Allied powers and of massacring Muslims. They admit that the Armenians are being deported, but claim that the deportations are mandated by national security issues and limited to war zones on the Turkish and Russian front. I think it's useful to look at some elements of the Ottoman response. So under the heading of, I've done a kind of a content analysis here and broken this down into different categories. The first one is outright denial. Quote, "It is completely false that there have been massacres of Armenians in the empire." Quote, "The accusations of the governments of the Triple Entente on this subject are nothing but lies." And then allegations of Armenian collusion with the enemy. The commanders of the Anglo-French naval forces began corresponding with the Armenians in the region of Adana, Dort-Yol, Yurmartalik, and Alexandretta, and other areas of the littoral, and have instigated them to revolt. Again, quote, "The searches of homes of the Armenian revolutionaries led to the discovery of revolutionary flags and important documents concerning the insurrection they were fomenting, as well as the separatist aims of the movement. These documents prove, moreover, that the revolutionary committees, which were based actually in Paris, London, and Tiflis, effectively enjoy the protection of the English, French, and Russian governments. The searches conducted at the same time in the provinces led to the discovery of thousands of bombs and Russian rifles among the Armenians." And then allegations of Armenian massacres of Turks and further allegations of Armenian treason. Quote, "Those who are current with matters of the Orient know perfectly well that it is the agents of the Triple Entente, particularly those of Russia and England, who, taking advantage of every opportunity, excite the Armenian population to revolt against the imperial government. These continual goings-on have been aggravated since the start of hostilities between the Ottoman Empire and the aforementioned governments. Thus, their councils and other agents in Bulgaria and Romania have sent bands of young Ottoman Armenians to the Caucasus. The Russian government has failed neither to enlist these young Ottoman Armenians in its army, nor to introduce them in the Armenian centers of the empire, after having provided them with arms and bombs and having furnished them with proclamations and revolutionary programs. The aim of these activities was to create in those centers a secret revolutionary organization and to lead the Armenians in these regions to rise up against the imperial government. They pushed them at the same time to massacre the Turks and the Kurds." Again, quote, "The Russian government has caused the massacre of Armenians, of thousands of peaceful Muslims in the district of Kars, and lets them die pitilessly from hunger or thirst by the same Armenians who were Ottoman prisoners captured in the Caucasus." Then we have the category of national security and sovereignty arguments. Quote, "In view of these facts, a duty imposed itself on the imperial government, that of suppressing the revolution and of maintaining public order." Quote, "The right of the imperial government to take all measures necessary to suppress such revolutionary and separatist movement flows directly from the right of sovereignty with which no one can argue." Quote, "If certain Armenians are to be displaced, it is because they live in areas situated in the war zones where their presence, given what just has happened, filled the imperial government with legitimate worry from the point of view of national defense. The Sublime Porte considers it its duty to adopt such measures as it deems necessary to ensure the security of its land and maritime borders, and that it has no obligation to give an explanation to any foreign government." And finally, in summary, "Thanks, therefore, to measures for public order taken by the imperial government in the fullness of its rights, the revolutionary movement of the Armenians was able to be suppressed without any massacres taking place." This is a prototypical denial, because the themes that you have expressed here in May of 1915 are ones that have continued to be expressed over the decades and the last century, bringing us to this point. During the interwar period after the formation of the Republic of Turkey, denial continued in a variety of different forms. And the next point I'd like to talk about is the speech that İsmet Pasha, later İsmet İnönü, the second president of Turkey, who ruled from 1938 to 1950, made at the Lausanne Conference. This speech was reprinted in the United States in a prominent journal. He begins in 1915 with the Turkish conquest of, 1453, off by several centuries, with the Turkish conquest of Constantinople. And he provides a very romanticized view of the relationship between the Turkish state and the various national minorities. And he says that this system worked very well until the minorities came under the influence of the foreign powers, especially the Russians, who instigated these minorities to rebel. He mentions the fate of the Armenians, which he describes as regrettable. His argument is that minorities were accorded many rights that were compassionate and generous, and yet mysteriously the minorities, especially the Armenians, succumbed to foreign influences and spoiled what he seems to think was an idyllic relationship between Armenians and other minorities and the Turkish state. He not only claims that this was true in the past, but he offers this as a program, a prescription for the relationship of remaining minorities within the Republic of Turkey. And he has this chilling last sentence here, where he says, "The best guarantee for the security and full development of minorities would be those furnished by the laws of the country, as well as by the liberal policy of Turkey toward all communities." And then we have this chilling phrase, "whose members do not swerve from their duties as Turkish citizens." In other words, practicing democracy. Now, if Inanu's speech was a singular one-time event, I don't think it would be noteworthy, but it wasn't. These kinds of ideas served as the kind of opening salvo of a much broader Turkish program of creating a nationalist memory that erases the history of the minority peoples and creates a new official Turkish history. There were various ways in which this was done. One was the physical destruction of any markers that had remained after the genocide in the area of churches and monasteries. 1,700 of these were either completely or severely destroyed during the genocide itself. And ones that remained have fallen into disrepair. They've been vandalized. They've been used for alternative purposes like granaries, jails, mosques, etc. This is part of a much larger program of eradicating the memory of a people's past. And we have two quotes, one by Talat himself, representing the CUP, and a later quote by Ismet Inanu that reflect this theme. Talat said that everything must be done to abolish even the word Armenia in Turkey. And Inanu expressed a similar sentiment. It is not only necessary to eradicate centuries-old traditions, beliefs, and customs, but to efface the memory of them as well. One way in which this was done was by changing the script for writing Turkish from Arabic to Western orthography. And the effect of this was to cut off Turks from any published works prior to 1928. It was within a generation. Very few people could read the old scripts. So this opened the opportunity for Turkey to create a whole new history, which they did through the Turkish Historical Society. And it's been estimated that between 1.5 and 3 million books were published during Ataturk's reign. Which created an entire new history, in many, like history, art history, the history of architecture, etc., all written from a nationalist perspective, which Umit Ungor describes as the backbone of the Turkish national narrative. What was created in the 1920s and 30s prevails today. Although there have been changes, I feel very confident in saying that the majority of Turks do not have any sources of information outside of this official cultural and political history that was created. We also have instances of people, Westerners, Americans, acting as agents for the Turks in burnishing the Turkish image. I think particularly notorious here are a former U.S. Admiral Colby Chester and his son, also a military officer in the United States Navy. They were involved in contracting with Turkey to get permission to build railroads and then also securing mineral rights along the railroad right-of-way. They published articles also in the United States. I'll just read you this incredible quote. I'm not easily surprised by much, but this quote actually even shocked me. Chester wrote, "The worst outrage ever perpetrated by the Turks on the Armenians occurred in 1915. The wholesale deportations of that period were brought about by Turkish fear that the procedure of this alien population, if left to continue without interruption, would get the agitators into real trouble, and the Turks wished no such episode, though naturally they disliked Armenian interference with Turkey's operation of her own affairs, political, religious, and domestic. So the Armenians were moved from the inhospitable regions where they were not welcome and could not actually prosper to the most delightful and fertile part of Syria. Those from the mountains were taken into Mesopotamia, where the climate is as benign as in Florida and California, whither New York millionaires journey every year for health and recreation. As this was done at great expense and money and effort, the general outside report was that all, or at least many, had been murdered. The last section is on the film, the proposed film, The 40 Days of Musa, which was never made because of intervention with the State Department and MGM by the Turkish Foreign Ministry and the Turkish ambassador to the United States. I'm going to have to cut this short. I think that this story that's fairly well known, there are several lessons to be derived from it. The first is the boldness with which Turkey acted. They presumed that they had every right to prevent this film from being made, even though it involved a foreign American corporation that they had no ownership or control over. But they felt perfectly comfortable exerting that pressure and getting the film project killed. Turkey also, in the course of these discussions, took a maximalist position, never offered any compromise. Thirdly, they threatened both MGM and the United States with reprisals. And finally, they exhibited a lot of persistence, because when there were proposals to revive the project in the 1950s and 60s, they similarly intervened and killed the project. There's a very nice short quote by a State Department official on this, who said that this was in 1953, that it was his hope, quote, that the book would never be made into a play or a movie because the Turkish people are particularly sensitive to this period of their history and are trying desperately to cover it up. We don't usually get such candid statements, but that's a gem. Okay, in conclusion, I would say that the denial of the Armenian genocide is nearly as old as the genocide itself. There are only a few weeks that separate them in the spring of 1915. And the genocide represents a deep contradiction within Turkish society today, and is reflected in its educational systems, its mass media, its popular culture, its history, politics, and international relations. It remains the case today that most Turks are born into what I call an invisible totalitarian culture, which completely distorts and hides the real history of how Turkey was created. So I would say that in 1915, Turkey committed a physical and moral abomination, and for there to be justice for the Armenians and from the Turks to extricate themselves out from under their weighty national lie, there has to be an acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide, and there has to be justice for Armenians in ways that remain to be determined. So the future, I think, is ambiguous. We can take an optimistic look at this or a pessimistic one, but I think that anyone who's knowledgeable about this issue understands that there are powerful cultural, political, and also military obstacles standing in the way of such an acknowledgement. Thank you.